This tutorial will cover Project 2, Designing Psychological Science Experiment for the 24-25 PSYC3052C Advanced Social Psychology course. For this tutorial, there are quite some things to go over. I'll first cover the project overview, then highlight the important links that you should pay attention to, go over a good example, go over a less ideal example, and then I'll move on to focus on factors you should focus on and factors you should avoid when doing this project. Project 2 is worth 35% of your final grade, so check the syllabus. There are lots of guidelines and information there, such as explanations on the original paper, Mannex's thesis, the type of analysis used, how the single question design works, and examples from previous years. Most importantly, there are guidelines on how to do this task. So please check the syllabus. I'm not going to go over everything about this project in this tutorial. This tutorial will focus more on the examples and factors to focus on and factors to avoid more. On to the project overview. So things to note. Your project 2 must be testing new directions. Please do not repeat the same themes as previous years. This makes things a lot harder since a lot of topics were covered, but there is plenty out there. Try and find things in effective altruism that have not yet been tested empirically in psychological science, so that we can inform the effective altruism community on whether the intuitions are correct. Make sure you design the question and your scales carefully, and take note of the following things to avoid. As stated on the syllabus, there are 2 stages for Project 2. For Stage 1, it's worth 30% of your Project 2 grade. This is due on 16th of March before 11:59 p.m. And Stage 1 is essentially everything before data collection. Stage 2, which is worth 70% of your Project 2 grade, is due on April 27th before 11:59 p.m. And this is your whole manuscript. On to the important links. The important links are the 2024 projects, what students did last semester. Please do take a look and learn from what they did. Some of them came up with quite interesting factors, which I'm going to go over briefly later on in this tutorial. Phoebe also has a tutorial on how to come up with factors in comparing charities, so please make sure you watch the video. There's also a video on Mannex's thesis, and Mannex himself made a tutorial explaining his thesis. Again, make sure you take a look at these links before you start doing Project 2. On to the good example from last semester. Let's skip straight to the background. When I'm going over the examples, I'm just going to briefly comment on areas that they did well or might not have done well. I'm not going to read out the highlighted paragraph. Just make sure that you go through these examples and read the highlighted parts in your own time. Seoul did their background quite well because in the very first paragraph, they provided quite a good background to explain to readers what effective altruism is. They don't just assume that everybody knows what EA is and why it's important to look at. So this served as a very good introduction as to why they proposed certain factors and how they linked those factors back to effective altruism. And in their background, they also provided quite a lengthy and reasonable justification as to why this project is needed. They also provided a brief review as to what happened in the original paper, Baran and Samanska, 2011, so that readers will actually know what the original paper did and what they found to provide a more comprehensive understanding of how Project 2 is building on the original paper. They also provide a brief background on the Chan and Feldman 2023 review. And the Chan and Feldman paper is a replication of the original Baran and Szymanska paper. They elaborated on what the Chan and Feldman paper replicated and extended. And again, this also helps readers understand how Project 2 further builds on what has been found before. Another thing that they did well is that in their current study, they actually briefly stated what factors they would actually talk about in their project, which in this case is a previous donation by close family, local community recommendations, and age effect, which is divided into 3 subgroups. On to factor 1. It's about close family donated. I'm not going to go through all of the information provided here, but what they did is that they provided quite a comprehensive and good background and rationale for suggesting this close family donated factor. And they also provided a very logical hypothesis, which could actually be easily derived from reading their background. And for this factor, it can actually help inform effective altruism because it could be insightful for better understanding whether children imitate the behavior of close family members, such as adults or grandparents who take care of them. And if their hypothesis is supported, then the EA community could actually consider maybe perhaps developing educational materials to teach close family members about effective giving, which could then affect the children's future donation behavior, which could potentially become more effective as time goes on. On to the second factor, which is local community leader recommendation. Again, they followed a similar structure as factor 1. They provided a generally good background with good empirical support, and then provided a hypothesis which can be easily and logically derived from the information they provided above. This local community leader's recommendation can also provide insights for the effective altruism community because it can tell us a bit more about authority and norms and how this could affect donation behavior. If people have more authority, would this make us follow what they're doing, even though they're donating to an ineffective charity? On to factor 3, age effect. They followed a similar structure to the previous 2 factors. If you remember, for this factor, they actually proposed 3 hypotheses, and in their background/introduction for this factor, they actually make it clear as to why 3 factors are proposed. But first, the empirical evidence for suggesting this factor actually comes from a relatively wide domain, which includes like an evolutionary perspective and also a crime perspective. This demonstrates that there is a potential implication of this factor in effective altruism. And in one of their paragraphs in Factor 3, they demonstrated some critical thinking by highlighting that there are mixed findings about the literature. Some literature support that people are more likely to donate to young adults than the elderly and the adults, whereas other research suggests that people are more likely to donate to the elderly rather than to young adults, demonstrating an opposite effect. At the very end, they clearly differentiate between three sub-hypotheses within this factor to better understand how age can actually affect people's decisions on donating to what charities. On to the summary of the hypotheses and findings in their table. This is generally done quite well because they name the factors in a good way, so it's easy for the reader to immediately know what the factor is generally about. The hypotheses are clear with directions, and they highlight whether or not there are actually related findings to their factor. And inside the related findings, they state clearly what the direction of the effect is and provide the stats to support the findings, which includes the mean and the t-score in this case, and the p-values. On to the less ideal example. The less ideal example from last semester was from Vienna. While they did declare and acknowledge that they used AI in some of the work here, which is good, their background was actually quite lacking because they made quite some statements within their background about charitable giving, effective altruism, but they did not include the references for these. So it's unclear to the markers whether these points were made by themselves or is this supported by empirical evidence. Again, I have the same comments for this particular paragraph because they state things like, where donors favor low risk, measurable outcomes, and prioritize innovative but unproven interventions. So are these their own definitions, or are these definitions supported by empirical evidence? And in their background/introduction, they also said that this study employs an experimental paradigm adapted from Baron and Steinmanska and Chand and Feldman. The issue is it's that the readers won't actually know what happened within these two papers. So it would be better if a brief overview of these papers were provided. Additionally, readers won't know which of these two papers are the replication and extension and which one is the original paper. On to the identified factors Vienna proposed. They first proposed the predicted risk effect. While this factor is actually could potentially be quite informative because it could tell how effective charities could actually frame their advertisements to increase donations received. It's just that they kept using definitive words when those studies weren't using causal designs. So you cannot, for example, say that a correlation study generates a causal outcome when that was not what the study was focusing on in the first place. And another issue is that they didn't adhere to the APA 7th in-text citation style. So please keep that in mind. While they did highlight what the implication of looking at this particular factor is for the effective altruism community, they actually missed out the hypothesis. So I'm not sure what they are specifically testing in this case. On to the next factor, the novelty bias. This is also actually quite an interesting factor to look at. It can potentially inform the EA community whether they can use novel ways to address issues and include it in their advertisements to draw attention. But similar to above, they didn't really adhere to APA 7 style, not sure why these authors' names are capitalized. And their implication is actually quite good, but what is lacking again is their hypothesis. It's a good implication, but missing specific hypothesis. So the reader knows why it's important, but we don't know exactly how you're testing it. The next factor they proposed was the choice freedom effect. I won't talk about the potential implication for this. You can read my comments later on. There's a similar issue here is that their hypothesis is missing again. So please be careful. Make sure you're consistent with your structure and always include your hypothesis at the end of introducing whatever factor you're focusing on to ensure that readers know what specific aspect of the factor you're assessing. This gives us a clear idea of what to expect in your methodology and your results. They also proposed the status quo effect, but when I was reading through it, there was a particular part that stood out to me. Not sure how this is related to status quo, so please make sure all of your points are related to the factor you are proposing. And again, they have a good implication, but missed out on the hypothesis. For the readers, they will only know what the hypotheses are when they reach this table, which is quite surprising considering they didn't actually cover what the hypotheses actually are early on. I would suggest you to put the hypothesis in the introduction right after you indicate the implications of looking at the factor. What they did well is that they included the related findings and the related statistics and the relevance direction. Let's now move on to factors to focus on. This is actually a Google sheet of the effect sizes of the previous semester's factors. This is what the Google sheet for the previous semester's effect sizes look like. We included the effect name, the group who proposed the factor, and their hypothesis, the effect size coincidence, the absolute effect size, and whether or not their hypothesis is actually supported. If you take a look, there's actually around 31 hypotheses suggested from the previous semester. I'm just going to cover the top 5 here with the largest effect sizes for this tutorial. So I extracted the top 5 effect sizes from last semester. You can also access this document from clicking on the EG top 5 factors link on the slide. The factor with the biggest effect size from last semester was political affiliation, not support. The scenario was that charities A and B both save lives with the same effectiveness, so lives saved per dollar spent. Charity A does not have any political affiliations, while Charity B is affiliated with a political party that you do not support. So their hypothesis was that more participants would choose no affiliation over negative affiliation, and this finding was found to be significant. Participants tend to choose Charity A, and the co-z was quite large with a negative 1.49. And the students did not actually provide a suggested implication because for last semester, it was best 2 out of 3 projects, and they decided not to proceed with this project. From my perspective, I think this factor is actually quite helpful because it could potentially be quite practical in terms of having charities avoiding having political affiliations or stating their political affiliations in their introduction or about us, which could potentially improve charitable giving. The second factor with the highest effect size is also suggested by Bangkok. This time, it's about political views, supporting versus not support. What's different here is that Charity A's political views align with your personal views, and Charity B's political views do not align with your personal views. So this was found to be significant, where people chose to support Charity A over Charity B because their political views align with their personal views. Similar to the implication I talked about above here, I think it's also another good indicator that charities should not indicate their political affiliations if they want to improve charitable giving. Adding on to that, if it's quite hard to actually know each person's political and personal views, another implication would be that somebody could consider making a website that categorizes the charities into different political views or that they're neutral and allow users to filter through those information and decide which charity they should donate to. If possible, let's hope that all of the charities are equally effective. On to the third factor. Again, this is proposed by Bangkok, and this time it's about affecting financial situations, negative. And in this case, Charity A's cause is not related to and therefore does not affect your financial situation, business, or job. Charity B negatively impacts your financial situation, business, or job. The hypothesis was that people would prefer Charity A over Charity B, and this was found to be significant with a co-z of negative 1.23. Again, when looking at this type of factor, consider how you could actually inform the effective altruism community. In my point of view, I think similar to the one above, it would be making a website that allows donors to filter charities by perhaps their financial situation, their business, or job, and decide whether or not to donate the charity based on that filter. The fourth factor is proposed by Singapore, and it's about their own community versus other community. In this case, charities A and B both help local communities with the same effectiveness. Charity A focuses on addressing issues in your own local community, while Charity B focuses on addressing issues in a local community different from your own. Singapore hypothesized that more people would choose Charity A over Charity B, and this hypothesis was supported with a cohency of -0.1. The students suggested implications that people may prefer to donate to a geographically close cause, and further research is needed to understand why or how this works. I was thinking that they could further build on their implications by perhaps saying, as indicated here, that charities could consider promoting their charity in more local communities related to its origin to boost donations, as people prefer own local community over a local community that is different from your own. Another implication would be that when the charities are actually advertising themselves, they should write their advertisements or introductions in a way that would minimize the bias of choosing your own local community over other community. And the final one I'm going to cover would be also from Bangkok. And this time they proposed a factor about religious affiliation. In this scenario is that Charity A and Charity B both save lives with the same effectiveness, lives saved per dollar spent. Charity A does not have any known affiliations to a faith or religion. Charity B is affiliated with a faith or a religion that you do not believe in. So Bangkok hypothesized that people will choose no affiliation over affiliation of not belief, and this was supported. Participants chose Charity A more, and the cohency was found to be a -0.96. In this case, from this finding, to inform the EA community to actually reduce or do not mention anything about their affiliation to a faith or religion to boost donations. And I also think it will be helpful if further research is conducted as to why people are against donating to a faith or religion that they do not believe in. Let's move on to factors to avoid. The document linked is the text version uploaded to Phoebe's Dropbox because Phoebe was the one who removed all of those factors and provided reasons why they won't work. The Word version is just me converting the text file into Word document and randomly selecting scenarios to go through for this tutorial. First factor that got taken out that I'm going to go through will be from Bangkok. This one that is too explicit and doesn't measure the actual thing. For this one, it says that both charities are equally effective in addressing animal welfare using the same amounts of money. Charity A uses guilt appeal in its advertisement image and caption. For example, a photo of an abandoned dog is provided with the caption, "Charlie is abandoned and sad. You can save him by donating or adopting from us." Charity B, emotion neutral in its advertisement image and caption. For example, a photo of the charity's logo is provided with the caption, "SPCA needs your donation. Please help." It doesn't actually measure the real thing because there's quite some things bundled here together. Charity A, it includes guilt appeal, so emotions is involved, which is reflected also in emotional neutral in Charity B. Second thing is that captions are provided. So is it actually due to the effect of the guilt appeal / emotional neutral image, or is it due to the caption? The second scenario I'll go through is from Paris, which is another example of too many things bundled in a single question. So charity A and B both focus on improving efficiency to address unexpected crises and deliver resources within the shortest time. A takes longer time to respond, but offers official, comprehensive resources to urgent crises and donor questions in a professional manner. B responds more quickly for its quick thinking and decision making, but may have scalability issues during major emergencies. The issue is that here, there are around 3 factors that are bundled into a single question. 1, time to respond. 2, professionalism. 3, comprehensiveness of responses. These are from Charity A, but this is not really reflected in Charity B as well. It seems like Charity B is also looking at different things, looking at decision making and scalability issues. In actuality, it seems like there are 5 factors being assessed here, which is way too much in a single question. It can make participants confused. The other scenario is that a lot of students propose marketing and interface related factors, but it's not very relevant or related to social psychology. And for example, let's choose a relatively short one. So this contrasts charities A and B, where A utilizes digital advertising, including social media and influencer partnership, and B spends a lot of money in its advertising and tends to advertise mostly on TV and printed media. So if you think about or approach this in a social psychology way, there isn't much linkage from this to social psych. On to another factor. This is from Seoul. Again, it's marketing and interface related preferences. For example, both charities combat malaria with the same effectiveness. A features the phrase, even a penny will help. Charity B does not include the additional, even a penny will help phrase. So this is more looking at marketing. Will you use an emotionally charged phrase to increase donations, or you won't? And this is, again, not social psychology related. On to a hypothetical and very obvious scenario, which also Phoebe highlighted doesn't have something concrete about the charities. Charities A and B help with the same issue and group of recipients. After donating to A, you feel much better or less anxious despite lower effectiveness. After donating to charity B, you don't feel much better or less anxious despite higher effectiveness. As mentioned by Feeny, this is too hypothetical. You're asking participants to put themselves in hypothetical shoes of whether they would feel more or less anxious. And it's way too obvious because people would obviously decide to donate to a charity where you would feel much better. It doesn't have something concrete about the charities because you won't actually know how effective the charity is when you donate to them at that point in time. That's the end of the examples and factors to focus on or factors to avoid. One thing we would like to remind you is that please remember to proofread your work before submitting to ensure that your quality and content are actually consistent throughout. If your work quality and content aren't consistent throughout, This has implications on the flow of your work and the organization and your critical thinking, which then would affect your grade. So again, before you submit, make sure you read through your entire manuscript with fresh eyes to ensure that there is no inconsistent content or inconsistent quality. If you have any questions, please post them on Zulip. We'll be happy to answer you. And these are the references for the icons used in this PowerPoint. And that's the end of the tutorial.